Alrighty, it looks like we're good to go. This is Group 5, and we're going to discuss the Hanjin bankruptcy for our group discussion. I think we're just going to go ahead and start off with the first jumping off point. What have been the global ramification of Hanjin's bankruptcy, and how long will we feel the effects? Anybody want to start?
Yeah, so the ramifications were obviously, all of those containers were stuck on all of those different vessels from different companies. Some of them were trying to offload them and put them on other vessels or aircraft, but that was too much money. So definitely a lot of cargo got delayed. A lot of people lost money because they couldn't deliver.
Mm-hmm. I think that not only does the cargo get delayed, I think the most important factor in thinking about this is each of what value of the total amount of cargoes on the ships and how much it can affect basically the GDP of the country being imported or exported, because nothing is leaving the port or going out, and it causes other ports to become stacked up with greater capacity and reach their capacity, which entails more product considerably being a high priority, raising prices all around. So it's kind of like a snowball effect, or hit a domino, and it causes it to have secondary and actually tertiary ramifications in the logistics area. Oh.
Yeah, and to add to that is the added cost for like the small vendors. Those guys really took it on the chin. Big conglomerates like Samsung, those multi-billionaire companies could absorb some of that shock, but if you were a small or medium-sized company, it was almost a make or break decision if your losses was that you couldn't absorb those losses.
Mm-hmm.
I think even for some of the big ones, it was a big shock, but because of the 3 months, like it wasn't just a couple of weeks. I mean, that's a big cycle time for a lot of companies, and the decisions on what should they do. Should they should they try to source in a different way and work that out, or should they just hold that inventory that's stuck on those ships for such a long time?
Mm-hmm.
And so
yeah,
I
think the big companies they were definitely affected, but they had a workaround. But like Jimmy mentioned, the smaller companies, they're kind of that was it for them. Couldn't really do anything.
Well, another thing is, since LA is basically the main port, LALB, it's called, is the main port over there. What if, a lot of these smaller companies or even larger companies, their only route or their only plan is the importation of product to that port? What if they don't have any secondary plans like this happens? Because a lot of these companies are, all right, we'll eat the cost a little bit, and we'll go up to Tacoma, and because Tacoma is the second largest port on that side, or even you can even go to Vancouver. So a lot of those companies don't have that plan, or maybe even the push for these logistics companies to enter any of those ports.
Yeah, I would add also, for those companies that was solely dependent on just-in-time logistics, it definitely was a forcing mechanism to have them look at alternatives. And again, for some of the small or medium-sized companies, it forces them also to eat the cost of maybe having increased in their buffer stocks. Or if they didn't have buffer stocks, they had to plan on having buffer stocks or alternative sourcing after that. So, not only was the cost astronomical for not getting it there on time, but the added cost for potentially, additional warehouse space and alternative docking. So, it was trifecta if you was a small company, a medium-sized company.
I think we're still, I think the small companies are still feeling that, the effects of that, because I was looking at some of the prices. I couldn't find any like updated articles on where stuff is now, but some of the mentions in the articles about how far the prices jumped after the bankruptcy, and where they're at now, they haven't come down too terribly much. I was looking at one, and it went up to 1,700 for shipping from the West Coast to into Asia, and a 40-foot container, and now it's only down to like 1,300. And I was just looking at a couple of those, and they haven't changed that much. And so that consolidation definitely affected those prices. That a lot, like you guys are saying, the bigger companies can absorb those costs, but some of these smaller ones, the difference of $600-700 per container, that's very significant.
Well, also, like you said, the time of how long this is affecting companies, because even if the port opens up, or when the port opens up, the companies are stacked and they're backed up. So what they're trying to do is force all their material to catch back up to where they were. And when they catch back up too quickly, it's going to have a giant spike of, basically, it's just like a stock market. Basically, it's going to have a giant spike of all this material. And what's going to happen is that material is going to stop. And then once it gets to a tipping point, it's going to drop way back down again. And then people are going to bring it back up, or bring more material back up to cover it. It's kind of like a balancing effect, where over time, the amount of material will change, but it takes a while for it to balance out, because people still haven't gotten back to where they were, of bringing over a regulated amount of material. And it's like playing catch up too quickly.
I guess one of the upsides for this is the whole entire shipping industry. By Hanjin facing a crisis, they got eliminated, so there's less competition in the shipping industry as a whole. You take out the number 6 guy, and there's less competition. Prices go up. I think that's better for the other guys, such as Maersk and a couple other those huge shipping companies.
Yeah, so I think this incident is also going to cause big companies to diversify their, how they transport stuff, not just on one company, but maybe now they're going to use several just in case something like this happens, so they don't lose, all of their cargo. Kind of like you can use UPS and FedEx and DHL. They're probably going to start looking at some of those other backups, just in case.
Mm-hmm.
I also think the transfer of information, there's got to be ramifications for that, forcing some of these companies to be a little bit more open about where they're at and how they're being affected. I know on a smaller scale that happens with suppliers, and these carrier services, I don't think are exempt from that after something like this. The big companies that do a lot of service with them will want to know, some of this transparent operations of theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, there's some good stuff that comes out of it, right, for the industry.
And what is it? They were talking about that, they thought they were too big to fail. They're getting into that area where, you have a multi-billion-dollar company just all of a sudden not be able to pay their backers, and then they're in massive amounts of debt, and nobody's going to bail them out. Luckily, a bank and the CEO threw together $90 million of his own, but it still wasn't good enough. It just went downhill. But as you can see that even if you're big and you have basically, number 6 of the world's shipments, you're still not big. You're not big enough to not fail. You're going to.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely lessons learned from this for all the folks, all the companies shipping their cargo.
Mm-hmm.
So if we move on to the next question, did your companies feel any impact of the Hanjin fallout? And if so, what happened and was it resolved? Anyone?
For me, it's nothing direct. I don't work in the supply chain. I wouldn't know exactly how it's affected, aside for the trickle down sort of the products that we use, the supplies that we come. I'm sure it affected that in the long run. We get a lot of products that are plastic, the petroleum and stuff, which is often shipped in that way, and so I'm sure that prices were affected in that, but nothing that I can directly attribute to that.
Yeah, the same for me on my end. I not in the global supply chain space, so little to no effect at all, other than tracking and tracing it on the business networks, cable news networks, and how it affected the United States consumers and businesses. Because I think it occurred right around the big holiday seasons. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Black Friday. So that was the news feed for longer than 3 days. And so, I definitely was keeping track of it in that space. But personally, it did not affect me at all.
Yeah, same with me. I don't think anything affected, the military so much because they buy products for companies who manufacture in the U.S. The contractors from the U.S. So, to my knowledge, it had no impact.
Okay. Good deal.
I'm the same. Both companies I have worked for are global, but they have gotten all their products from Europe, and that's where the headquarters are located. Which there's a lot of the shipping containers are very easy to get, no matter what, from those areas. It's Asia to America is a difficult one. So no impact there.
Okay. I guess we move on to question 3. There are many factors that contributed to Hanjin's demise, such as major losses during the 2008 financial crisis, which came shortly after the orders of mega ships and general hubris and excessive container capacity worldwide. Do you think that Hanjin had time to recover from the 2008 crisis, and did they simply ignore lessons learned from the massive losses they accrued during that time?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, from what I understand about it, and I have limited knowledge about this just from what I've been researching and reading right now, that I think they struggled after the crisis a lot more because the prices tanked and they were competing with some very, very big opponents. If I remember right, I mean, the Maersk is almost like double what they were. I mean, they're huge. And so once those prices tanked, I think Hanjin was just basically trying to just go with it the best they could. And I don't think it was a long-term strategy, but they just kept going with it for as long as they could. And finally it collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, also, I went through my research. I had read several articles about, it was, almost standard practice for the Korean government to step in, save those large companies from demise, even though, they made bad business decisions, because of it was such a jewel to the country and the prestige of the country that, the president would always step in to, provide a lifeline for those huge companies. like you said earlier, they became too big to fail. But the country was under such a strain to separate, the government from private industry. They was made an example within the country. So whatever business decision that they made, they were left to their own vices. The country basically let them fail. So, it was a lesson learned. I think it won't soon happen again from over there. But I think they definitely learned from that lesson, to do their due diligence as far as proper management, proper bookkeeping, and and just as the industry as a whole learn from it. So hopefully they did. They take something positive away from it.
Mm-hmm. I actually don't think that I think it was a multiple amounts of things, and they knew exactly where they were going, and they knew that they were tanking, and they probably tried everything possible, but there's no way around it. That's why I don't think it was their hubris. I don't think they were delusional or delusionally confident in how big they were. I think that they, just a magnitude of things developed, and they knew probably they were going under, and they didn't try to cover anything. They just tried to recover. And once they got probably past the point of no recovery, it just went all downhill from there. And, they couldn't write off as money losses. And it just was, it just set it out of control.
Yeah. So I don't think they were following the global economy back then. 2008 was the global economy was not doing so well, but yet the articles they showed that more and more ships were being built. The super ships with 180,000 20-foot containers and all of that. But the demand wasn't growing as fast as they were as it was in the previous year. Along with China's economy, that slowed down as well. So I think that also had something to contribute to their situation.
All right.
I would agree. I think that's they were trying to keep up some with the other players in the industry, and much like the 2008 crisis. You had some big leaders, and everybody's like, "All right, well, let's go ahead and follow." And so they made some poor choices and a little bit of that overconfidence in the way things were going, and it could have been handled better.
Yeah, I definitely agree. All right. Any other comments? I think this is it. I think, fellas. I think we addressed all the issues, all the questions in great detail. I guess any alibis? Well, okay.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. This was Group 5's discussion on Hanjin's bankruptcy.